Chapter 1693. What's going on? For some reason, an indescribable sense of fear suddenly surged from the bottom of Nanny's heart as she looked at the flowing light. Even though she didn't know what it was, she still keenly felt the terrifying danger. She didn't even think about it and immediately retreated. At the same time, Chu Liwei also heard the sound of the zither. She looked up and happened to see Nanny staring at the wall behind her with a horrified expression. Her eyes were filled with fear. It was as if she had seen something extremely terrifying. When Nanny started to retreat, Chu Liwei finally turned around to take a look. However, what she saw stunned her for a moment, because she suddenly realized that these streams of light were constantly gathering, as if they were forming some kind of totem. And for some reason, she felt that it was a little familiar. She frowned and took a few steps back. She wanted to take a closer look at the giant totem and see what it looked like. However, just as she raised her foot, a tyrannical suction force suddenly came from the wall. Her body immediately rushed forward uncontrollably. In the next moment, her figure completely disappeared behind the wall. Before everyone could react, they saw a white figure quickly hiding behind the wall. It was Rong Xiu. In addition, there was also a small figure who was only half a step behind Rong Xiu. She also raised her foot and rushed over. That was Dumpling. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the three figures quickly disappeared just like that. This scene shocked everyone present. Wasn't that just a wall? Why did it suddenly devour the three of them? It didn't even leave them any time to react. Nan Su Huai frowned and looked over. Only then did he see that several streams of light had appeared on the black wall. They intertwined with each other and seemed to be outlining a certain pattern. The power on it was so shocking that even the void around the wall was shaking. Nan Su Huai stopped fighting and wanted to rush in. Halfway through, he suddenly heard a figure. President Nan. Nan Su Huai turned around. Yuger's father, Chu Ning? Chu Ning immediately nodded with a worried expression. Is Dean Nan going in as well? I wonder if Chu Ning can go with you? He was truly worried about you. Although Rong Xiu and Dumpling had already followed them in, this incident was too strange, and he was still worried. If they could move together, it should be able to reduce a lot of unnecessary trouble. Nan Su Huai nodded without hesitation. Then let's go together. After saying that, the two of them really moved forward and entered the black wall. The originally chaotic and noisy scene quickly quieted down. Luo Yen recalled his divine body and looked at the black wall with a frown. In fact, when he arrived here, he noticed this wall at first glance, but because all his attention was on Nan Yi and Shangguanyu, he didn't pay much attention to it. However, from the looks of it, there was indeed something fishy about this wall. What happened just now? Nan Yuxing couldn't help but murmur in shock. His eyes were filled with astonishment. Everything was fine just a moment ago. How did everyone suddenly disappear? Luo Yen took a step forward and seemed to be planning to go in as well. Nan Yi hurriedly grabbed his sleeve. Uncle Luo Yen, you can't go in. Luo Yen saw her panicked expression and only thought that she was frightened by the sudden scene, so he patted her shoulder and said, The thing is still with Shangguanyu. Don't worry, I'll go get it and come back immediately. Nanny still refused to let go and shook her head nervously. No, you can't go in. You really can't go in. Uncle Luo Yen, it's too dangerous inside. At this moment, Luo Yen realized that her eyes were filled with fear and her body was trembling slightly. She seemed to be really scared. Could it be that she saw something just now? Luo Yen frowned. What's wrong? Is there a problem? Nan Yi shook her head. I don't know either, but I just feel that something is wrong inside. Uncle Luo Yen, why don't we wait outside? Anyway, they will come out sooner or later, won't they? It's the same to wait for them to come out. Luo Yen frowned even more. No one could guarantee when Shangguanyu and the others would come out after going in. Moreover, what if they didn't come out? At that time, it wouldn't be so easy to find them and take back the item. But Nanny was rarely so scared, and it really made him feel uneasy. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end, his heart ached for Nanny. Okay, then let's not go in. We'll just wait here. Before he could finish his sentence, another terrifying suction force swept over from the wall. The figures of the few people were quickly swallowed up. Not long after, all the figures in the area had completely disappeared. The wilderness once again regained its usual silence. Darkness. Endless darkness. Chu Luiwei only felt her body falling continuously. She was surrounded by a thick black color that couldn't be dissolved. It was quiet and only the sound of the wind whistling past her ears. Fortunately, this situation didn't last for long. She felt her body fall onto a piece of land. The ground was soft and the fall wasn't heavy. Chu Luiwei stood up and was about to take out a pearl to illuminate the place when a faint light suddenly leaked from above her head. She looked up. There seemed to be a blue-black sky above her head, like the sky in the middle of the night. However, right in the middle, there was an opening that had been cut open by something. Light seeped through and sprinkled on Chu Luiwei's body. It was also this light that allowed Chu Luiwei to see the surrounding scenery clearly. There was no scenery. All she saw was a piece of black land. Other than that, there was nothing else. She could only see the appearance of the area within 100 steps. Everything further away was still hidden in the darkness, and it was difficult to approach and grasp. Rong Xiu. Chu Luiwei called out softly. Before entering, she vaguely saw that Rong Xiu seemed to be following her closely. But now, it seemed that he wasn't with her. Chu Luiwei called out twice more, but there was still no response. This was expected. Chu Luiwei pursed her lips and didn't care too much. But, where was Dumpling? 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 Chu Luiwei called out Dumpling a few more times, but there was no response. The surroundings were quiet. Chu Luiwei's hands slowly clenched. Dumpling was her contracted divine beast, and they were telepathic. Even if they were separated by a distance, they could still sense each other. But now, she couldn't even detect Dumpling's breath. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1694. Was it because they were so far apart that they couldn't sense each other, or was there something that forcibly cut off the connection between them? Chu Luiwei didn't know. She put away the black shield, but still held the scarlet heaven sword tightly in her hand. After resting for a while and adjusting the breath in her body, Chu Luiwei lifted her feet and walked forward. She randomly chose a direction. After all, she couldn't tell any direction in this place. Instead of waiting in place and relying on a glimmer of hope to wait for Rong Xiu and the others to come, she might as well go find them herself. Even if she couldn't find them in a short time, it would be good to know more about this place. Thus, Chu Luiwei stepped on the road alone. Along the way, the faint smell of blood lingered at the tip of her nose. If Chu Luiwei wasn't so sensitive to this smell, she might not have noticed it. Unfortunately, she had never been able to identify where this smell came from. It was as if the air here had been filled with this smell. The surroundings were quiet. Chu Luiwei could only hear her own footsteps and her heartbeat. At a certain moment, she suddenly stopped and looked ahead. At this moment, the crack on the top of his head was much wider than before. More light shone in, allowing Chu Luiwei to see further. In front of her was still a vast expanse. However, Chu Luiwei's heart suddenly beat faster. Because the sound of the zither that had been lingering in her ears suddenly disappeared at this moment. She unconsciously clenched the scarlet heaven sword, and the blood in her body seemed to flow faster. She opened her mouth, only to find that her throat was dry and tight. An unfamiliar sound of footsteps suddenly came from the darkness. The footsteps were slow and calm, as if taking a stroll. However, every step seemed to be stepping on Chu Luiwei's heart. She seemed to have a premonition, and her whole body tensed up. Finally, a figure appeared in her line of sight. At the same time, a casual voice with a smile fell into her ears. "You're finally here." On the other side, after Rong Xiu followed Chu Luiwei in, the surroundings also fell into darkness. But soon, a white light flashed past his eyes. His heart trembled as he looked over. That ray of white light was actually spreading rapidly not far from him. Then, the light quickly condensed into a huge mirror. Everything around them was pitch black, but the appearance of the mirror instantly tore the darkness apart. A faint light was emitted from the mirror. The mirror was huge and wide. At a glance, one could not see the edges of it. It was as if it was completely embedded in the darkness and had become one with the surrounding darkness. It stood quietly in front of Rong Xiu. The surroundings were silent, and even the sound of the wind seemed to have stopped. Rong Xiu looked up slightly. A figure appeared in the mirror. The lines of his cheeks were smooth, and his appearance was pure and enchanting. He had sword-like eyebrows, a high nose bridge, and thin crimson lips. There wasn't a single spot that wasn't meticulously carved by the heavens. Compared to him, it seemed that everything in the world was dim in color. The figure reflected in the mirror was Rong Xiu. However, it was not exactly the same as Rong Xiu at this moment. Rong Xiu was dressed in white, and his eyes were clear and gentle. He was elegant and charming. However, the person in the mirror was dressed in a black robe. His eyes were deep and dense, and he was majestic and full of vigor. They clearly had the same appearance and figure, but they looked like two completely different people. Rong Xiu narrowed his eyes slightly, but there was no shock on his face. It seemed that he had expected this. He raised his hand, and a golden flame gushed out from his palm, jumping happily. Almost at the same time, the person in the mirror also raised his hand, and a cluster of flame appeared at his fingertips. However, the flame was thick and black. Rong Xiu knitted his brows slightly, but they quickly relaxed as his thin lips curved up slightly. So fast, the person in the mirror looked at him. Since you're here, you should have expected this scene. Besides, you've delayed for too long. He paused and raised his eyebrows. This time, are you going to break through, or continue to suppress yourself at the high deity level like before? Rong Xiu gently closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there were golden and black flames in his eyes. The smile on his lips deepened. Ayu! Ayu! In a dark space, Dumpling shouted anxiously as she walked. However, no matter how she shouted, she didn't get any response. The surrounding silence was terrifying. The rims of Tuanzi's eyes were red and filled with tears. She quickly wiped her eyes, clenched her small fists, and cheered herself on. It wasn't that Ayu didn't want her anymore, but she was swallowed into this strange wall. As long as she continued to search, she would definitely find Ayu. Besides, Ayu might also be looking for her. Thinking of this, Tuanzi was motivated again and quickened her pace to move forward. Nan Suhuai and Chu Ning came in together, so they were still in the same place. However, they were also trapped in a space and didn't meet anyone else. Therefore, they could only search for an exit while trying to contact others. Chu Luiwei stared at the figure in front of her. Almost at first glance, she was certain that this person was the one she had seen before, the one playing the guqin. However, although they were closer, the other person's figure was still shrouded in a layer of black shadow. It was hazy and couldn't be seen clearly. Chu Luiwei couldn't even tell whether the other person was a man or a woman. Because the voice was as ethereal as the zither, as if it came from far away. The tone was very light, but the voice was beautiful and dreamy. Listening to it made one feel relaxed and comfortable, but it was elusive. Chu Luiwei felt that this scene was really strange. At this moment, she couldn't see the other person's appearance and figure. Even the voice sounded like a dream. It was hard to tell if it was real or fake. However, the other person said such a sentence to her. It seemed like they knew her and had been waiting for her. Chu Luiwei asked tentatively, "You know me?" The person seemed to smile and said casually, "You're holding my zither score. Of course I recognize it." Zither score? Chu Luiwei was stunned. I didn't. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of shock flashed across her eyes. The only thing on her that was related to the zither sound was probably that water droplet. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Luiwei felt a strange wave coming from her dandan. The person opposite her raised his hand slightly. That water droplet rushed out of Chu Luiwei's body instantly. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1695. Chu Luiwei was shocked. Her pupils constricted and her heart was in her throat. However, the water droplet didn't go far away. It just floated quietly in front of her. Although the surrounding light was dim, the water droplet was still bright and dazzling. Don't worry. Now that it has recognized you as its master, I won't take it back. The voice of the person opposite her had a teasing tone. Chu Luiwei relaxed and calmed the waves in her heart. She cupped her fists and bowed respectfully to the person opposite her. I lost my composure for a moment. Please forgive me, senior. She could now confirm that this person was indeed the previous owner of the water droplet. No one had ever been able to summon the water droplet away so easily. This person was really her senior. The other party laughed again. It's your chance to get this thing. I'm no longer its master. It's just that I haven't seen it for so long that I miss it. As he spoke, Chu Luiwei saw the water droplet sway gently. Then, it gradually extended into a transparent remnant page. No, actually, it couldn't be considered transparent at this time. On it, several dazzling streams of light were flowing slowly and brilliantly. Chu Luiwei was slightly stunned. This thing was actually a Guqin score? For the past few years, she had been completely unaware of it. As if seeing through her thoughts, the person opposite her smiled and said, "This is only one of the pages. There's only a small section of incomplete music score on it. It can't be played. It's normal that you don't recognize it." Chu Luiwei nodded in understanding. However, she was still rather surprised. When she got this thing, she could tell that it seemed to be a page that was forcibly torn from a book. She had a lot of guesses about its origin. However, she really didn't expect it to be a Guqin score. "I thought you would have come earlier. I didn't expect it to take so long." As the person spoke, his fingertips moved. A transparent book suddenly appeared out of thin air. It was flowing with brilliant colors and brilliant light. Chu Luiwei's eyes hurt from the light. He subconsciously turned his face away and narrowed his eyes. However, she did not raise her hand to cover her eyes. She would rather endure the pain in her eyes and stare at the book, afraid that she would miss something. She didn't even need to think to know that this book must be the zither score that the other party had mentioned earlier. That page must belong to this book. This music score has been with me for many years. Now I can finally find a new owner for it. Chu Luiwei's heart skipped a beat. She had always wanted to find the rest of the items, but she never had the chance. Who would have thought that all of this would be laid out right in front of her? However, this book is actually not complete. The other party's sudden change in topic made Chu Luiwei's heart sink slightly. Back then, they tore this good zither score into 3 pieces. Now, other than the 2 portions here, even I don't know the whereabouts of the remaining portion. That person shook his head regretfully. When Chu Luiwei heard this, she felt that something was wrong. Back then? Trespass? This zither score, wait. A white light suddenly flashed in Chu Luiwei's mind. Taizu once said that tens of thousands of years ago, the earth-shattering battle where the gods fell seemed to be for a book. Could it be, this is the book? This is the book, that person said with a faint smile. Chu Luiwei was shocked. She clearly didn't say anything just now, and her expression was very calm. However, why did the other party seem to know all of her thoughts like the back of his hand? This is my place. Naturally, I can peek into some of your thoughts. However, you don't have to worry too much. I can only sense a part of it, and it's mostly related to this zither score. As for the other thoughts that you've hidden deeply, it's hard for me to know. Of course, I'm not interested in those. Chu Luiwei heaved a sigh of relief. She did not doubt his words at all. With the other party's strength, it was really easy for him to deal with her. There was no need for him to beat around the bush. I've embarrassed myself in front of Senior. Chu Luiwei's attitude was very proper, and she bowed politely. She knew very well that in front of such a person, any tricks would be useless. He might as well do it openly and honestly. However, this time, the waves in her heart didn't stop for a long time. It was obvious how precious this zither score was for so many high gods and even venerables to fight for it. She had been very emotional before, but she didn't expect that the treasure that once caused chaos in the world was in her hands. Although it was only an incomplete part, there were many cultivators in the world who wanted to get this page, but they couldn't find it. When she thought of this, Chu Liu's heart beat faster, and her blood seemed to be boiling. She knew that this thing was extraordinary. However, after knowing the truth, she was still shocked. The other party seemed to be satisfied with Chu Liu's reaction. Although this zither score was divided into 3 parts, there is still a connection between them. Since the one in your hand was the first to awaken and let you be the master, the other 2 parts will naturally follow you and let you be the master. The third part has been lost for a long time, and it won't be found in a short time. Let's not talk about it for now. You can take my share first. Chu Liu had already guessed the other party's plan, but when she heard this, she was still surprised. Such a precious treasure was actually given to her so easily? You don't have to feel burdened. Although I was its previous master, I'm now just a remnant consciousness in this zither score. Even if this zither score is complete, it's meaningless to leave it with me. The reason I've waited until now is to wait for a new master to appear. The other party's voice paused. Chu Liu immediately felt a gaze on her. She immediately tensed up. In other words, it's you. Chu Liu clenched her fists. So, the zither music from before was you luring me here? That's right. It's a pity that those people have been pestering you and wasting a lot of time. It's really annoying. Chu Liu could hear a trace of impatience in the other party's voice. However, I've already chased them away. At least before you complete the fusion of these 2 zither scores, they won't disturb you again. At this point, Chu Liu finally understood. The only thing she had to do now was to do as the other party said and reintegrate these 2 incomplete zither scores. It's just 1, so it shouldn't be difficult, right? Chu Liu thought and immediately cupped her fists at the other party. Thank you for your generous gift, senior. Don't be happy too early. The other party interrupted her with a smile. It won't be too late to thank me when you really do it. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1696. For some reason, Chu Liu heard a hint of mockery in his words, as well as a hint of anticipation for a good show. She swallowed the rest of her words. Yes, I will do my best. Swish. As soon as she finished speaking, the person opposite her waved his sleeve, and the transparent book quickly flew in front of Chu Liu. It floated quietly in front of her, one on the left and one on the right. Chu Liu's eyes scanned the book carefully. Although one of the 2 items was a thick book, and the other was a thin piece of paper, the aura they exuded was not much different. Furthermore, after approaching the book, she was able to sense a familiar feeling from it. They were of the same origin, so it was no wonder. Chu Liu suddenly thought of something and looked up. How should I address you, senior? She had been here for so long, and the book belonged to him. She couldn't possibly not know his name. The person opposite her was silent for a moment, as if deep in thought. After a while, he said, It's been too long, and I can't remember many things clearly. You can call me Ah Jing. Ah Jing. This name was very vague, and she couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Chu Liu was pondering in her heart when she heard the person opposite her say bluntly, I'm a man. Chu Liu. She almost forgot that he could spy on many of her thoughts. Chu Liu suddenly felt awkward. Yes, Senior Ah Jing. Fortunately, the other party didn't seem to care much about this matter. He waved his sleeve and sat on the ground. A zither suddenly appeared on his lap. Then, Chu Liu saw him gently place his hand on the zither. Chu Liu's eyelids twitched violently, and an ominous premonition surged in her heart. Senior Ah Jing, are you going to play the zither? Ah Jing looked at her strangely. Of course. Since you want to combine these 2 pieces of music, of course you have to have the help of the zither. If you don't even know the music, how can you perfectly combine them? Chu Liu understood. You mean that I have to understand this song before I can? Ah Jing nodded with satisfaction. You're not too stupid. In that case, he should be able to learn it quickly. Although it sounded like a compliment, Chu Liu didn't feel happy or happy. Instead, he felt even more uneasy. She clearly remembered that when she heard this song, She was so shocked that she vomited blood. Now, the person was right in front of him, and so was the Guqin. It was obvious that it was much more powerful than before. But now that things had come to this, she had no choice but to bite the bullet. "Thank you, Senior," Chu Liwei asked after thinking for a while. "By the way, Senior Jing, how long will it take for me to completely integrate these two scores?" Rong Xiao and the others followed him in. If it took too long, they would be worried. Jing's movements paused. He tilted his head and looked her up and down. Although she couldn't see his face and expression clearly, Chu Liwei still felt that his gaze was as sharp as a steel knife. With just one glance, she felt as if her entire body, inside and out, had been seen clearly. "You're a high god, a doctor, and a high-level weapon refiner. You've also just broken through to a great Shen King master. Your talent and comprehension aren't bad. No wonder it recognized you as its master." He spoke slowly, but it set off perilous waves in Chu Liue's heart. This person had only looked at her from afar, and he had already found out everything about her. At this moment, Chu Liue even felt that she had no secrets left in front of him. Although the Tianjing Yuan Meridian isn't rare, the support of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan's bloodline is rare. A trace of satisfaction finally appeared in Jing's voice. Chu Liue was inwardly speechless when she heard this. The Tianjing Yuan Meridian was a top-grade Yuan Meridian, but it seemed to be sparse and ordinary in his place. There was nothing special about it. Moreover, he said these words in such a calm tone, Chu Liue was even more curious about the other party's identity. However, this thought only flashed through her mind before she quickly suppressed it. No matter what, the most important thing now was to merge these two zither scores. If everything goes smoothly, it will be over in about 180 years. However, if something goes wrong in the middle, I'm afraid that it will take twice as long. Jing's tone was incomparably relaxed as he said this. Therefore, you must not let down your guard during this time. Chu Liue had been trying hard to maintain a calm expression, but after hearing these two sentences, it finally cracked. What? If everything goes well, 180 years? If it doesn't go well, it will take twice as long? Then wouldn't she have to wait here until the end of time? Jing looked at her with some astonishment. But, do you think there's a problem with the time? Chu Liue's chest tightened. It was more than a problem. There was a huge problem. How old was she now? Was she going to invest 100 years in this? Then what about Rong Xiao and Dumpling? What about her father and master? Not to mention 100 years, even if it was 10 years, the outside world would be completely different. Senior Jing, can't you shorten the time? Chu Liue spoke with difficulty. Jing chuckled. This time is already short enough. Without my help, you may not be able to complete it even if you stay here for 500 years. After all, this is not an ordinary zither score. Of course, Chu Liue knew that this was not an ordinary zither score. However, it could easily take 100 years. If you insist on shortening the time, it's not impossible. As if sensing Chu Liue's dilemma, Jing paused for a moment and finally relented. Chu Liue looked up. Jing said, "I can help you speed up the flow of time in this space, but correspondingly, the pressure and torture you have to bear will also increase exponentially. Can you still insist on this?" Chu Liue held her breath and nodded seriously. "Thank you, Senior." Even if she had to go through more pain and the process was more difficult, she had to do it. After all, she was no longer alone. There were many people who loved her and were waiting for her. She had to get out as soon as possible. Jing seemed to have expected her choice. He chuckled and shook his head. "I hope you won't regret it." Chu Liue's eyes were cold and stubborn. "I won't regret anything I've done in my life." This time it was the same. Good. Jing suddenly laughed. "Since you have the courage, then, let me see if you have the ability." Apart from other things, this little girl's courage was quite to his liking. The key was whether she could do it or not. Clang. He waved his fingertips and the sound of a zither broke through the air. Chu Liue felt a chill and immediately felt the atmosphere around her suddenly change. The sound of the zither was bleak and the world was filled with killing intent. Digression. Merry Christmas, the New Year's Day event is here. Everyone, are you ready? It starts at midnight on January 1st and ends at midnight on January 3rd. The event lasts for 3 days. 1. The comments section. Every day, 6%, 16%, 26%, 36%, 46%, 56%, 66%, 76%, 86%, 96% will get 66 Xiaoxiang dollars. 2. Every day, choose 3 favorite comments in the comment section and win a share. Finally, recommend Mr. An's new book. Mr. She wants to announce it every day. Pet article, no abuse, strong woman, group favorite. After Yuan Qi became popular. Anti-fans, no matter how beautiful she is, she's uncultured. That afternoon, the best university in China posted on its Weibo, "Let me introduce the youngest doctoral supervisor in our university, Professor Yuan Qi." Anti-fans, what's the use of being a top student? In the end, she has to bow down to her sugar daddy. The next day, Yuan Qi appeared at the International Economic Conference. Her name tag was signed, CEO of Jianghu Pharmaceutical Group. Anti-fans, she earns so much money and doesn't even know how to contribute to the country. 3 days later, the official news was released. The latest nuclear submarine has been released. Thank you to the chief designer, Yuan Qi, and all the research and development team. Anti-fans, can't afford to offend, goodbye. After the wedding, a reporter asked Shijiao, "Ninth Master, how did you get Goddess Yuan?" Shijiao silently opened a diary. Wife-chasing diary. 1. Make a ranking for my baby. 2. Vote for my baby. 3. Show support for my baby. 4. Book the entire theater for my baby's movie. 5. Join my baby's fan club. As everyone knew, Goddess Yuan had a super rich fan, Ninth Master Shijiao. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1697. Chu Liuyue's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately became alert. She knew how terrifying the sound of the zither was. She had vomited blood when she was outside the wall, let alone now. The two of them were so close, and the only thing she could do was accept it. Moreover, according to Senior Jing, if she wanted to combine the 2 pieces of music, she had to understand the music first. Chu Liyue took a deep breath and calmed herself down. Then, in the midst of the clanging music, she raised her hand and reached for the book. However, just as her fingertips touched the side of the transparent book, the latter suddenly flew up. Chu Liyue looked up instinctively, only to see countless transparent pages scattered all over the sky. That book had actually scattered just like that. In an instant, all she could see were the transparent pages glowing with a faint, gorgeous light. They were scattered messily and randomly in every corner of the space, almost filling the entire space. Chu Liyue looked around, and there were flashing lights everywhere. It was extremely gorgeous. However, this scene caused her heart to instantly surge with an intense uneasiness. Actually, there are only 3 pieces of music in that book. In that booklet, except for one real one, the rest were all fake. If you want to perfectly combine the 2 pieces of music, the first step is to find the real one among the tens of thousands of pieces. Jing's voice was still casual, but in Chu Liuyue's ears, it was no different from a sudden clap of thunder. It shocked her to the core. Only one piece among the tens of thousands of pieces was real? How long would she have to search? Most importantly, she didn't even know how to distinguish the real from the fake. Actually, you don't have to worry about this. The first piece of music is with you, and it has already recognized you as its owner. It will be much easier to find the second piece. However, the differences between these pieces of music are very small, so you have to look at each piece carefully. Although most of these pieces of music are fake, looking at each piece requires a lot of force and mental strength. With your current strength, you should be able to finish one in 3 days. That was also the reason why he said that he would need 100 years to complete this task. Chu Liuyue's eyelids twitched violently. 1 every 3 days. There were tens of thousands of them here. Who knew how long it would take? Needless to say, this was only the first step. In the face of Chu Liyue's silence, Jing thought for a moment and comforted him. It's okay. Practice makes perfect. In the future, your reading speed will definitely become faster and faster. With his status and personality, it was rare for him to say such comforting words. If it weren't for the fact that Chu Liyue was the only heir to this score, he would never have been so kind and patient. However, these words obviously had no effect on Chu Liyue. She closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. After a long silence, she accepted reality. Since they had already come this far, there was no turning back. Then, he could only hope that it would be completed quickly. With a thought, she recalled the remnant page that belonged to her back into her body. Probably because it sensed the existence of the second score, it didn't turn into a water droplet this time. Instead, it remained in the form of a remnant page, floating quietly in her dantian. On it, flowing light flashed and energy surged. Chu Liyue exhaled softly and reached out her hand. A transparent piece of paper nearby floated into her hand. The first one. At the same time, the sound of the zither also fell clearly into her ears. The killing intent was biting cold. In a mountain range thousands of miles away, there were continuous mountains and mist lingering around them. The rich energy of heaven and earth filled it, adding a bit of celestial aura. Especially the tallest mountain in the middle. It was steep and tall, majestic and beautiful. At a glance, it really looked like a fairyland. On the mountain, there were steps that went up from the bottom to the top. At the top of the mountain, there was a mountain gate piled up with stones. A wooden plaque hung horizontally on it. Wugo Peak. This was the most noble of the 18 peaks of the Nan family. Almost all of the important figures of the Nan family were gathered here. Ordinary people didn't even have the right to take a few steps, let alone go up the mountain. On Wugo Peak, there were many courtyards scattered in picturesque disorder. All of the noble people of the Nan family lived there. At the top of the mountain, there was a magnificent building. At this moment, a tall and burly figure was standing in front of the door, looking from afar. This person was the head of the Nan family, Nan Yifan. He looked to be about 40 years old. Although there were already traces of age on his face, one could still see some of the handsomeness of his youth. In particular, the reddish-purple brocade robe and the aura around him made him look even more noble and arrogant. He stood there, looking into the distance with his hands behind his back, as if waiting for something. Head, first young master and second young mistress haven't sent back any news. I'm afraid you won't be able to wait until today. Why don't you go back and rest first? Behind Nan Yifan, an old man who looked like a servant advised. I know. Nan Yifan nodded. It's just that they've been gone for quite some time this time. I do miss Yi a little. Come to think of it, Yi had never left him for such a long time in the past. I wonder if everything went well on their side. After all, it was not a small matter. It was impossible for him not to be worried. The old servant narrowed his weathered eyes with a smile. With first young master and the two elders around, you don't have to worry. Besides, second young mistress has always been clever and intelligent. Isn't the task you've given her a piece of cake? Don't worry. Hearing his words, Nan Yifan's face also revealed a smug and doting smile. He only had this one daughter. She was beautiful and talented, so of course he doted on her very much. This time, it was rare for him to be so firm with Nanny. But at the end of the day, it was for her own good. Although that child was very dissatisfied with him because of this matter, she should understand his painstaking efforts after a few years when she matured. I hope so. Nan Yifan retracted his gaze and planned to turn around and enter the house. However, he had just taken a step when he suddenly felt something and his expression changed abruptly. The old servant beside him immediately sensed that something was wrong and asked with concern. Head, what's wrong? He had followed Nan Yifan for several years and rarely saw such an expression on his face. Nan Yifan clenched his fists, and there seemed to be huge waves in his eyes. These auras suddenly disappeared. As soon as he said that, the old servant's expression changed instantly. How could this be? Nan Yifan quickly pushed the door open and entered. The old man followed closely behind and immediately locked the door. After entering, Nan Yifan took out a jade pendant. Inside, 4 light spots floated gently. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1698. Seeing this, Nan Yifan finally heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the aura of Nan Yi and the others was stored in it. If anything happened to any of them, this jade pendant would immediately react. Judging from the current situation, these 4 people should still be alive. But why did they suddenly lose contact? Nan Yifan only had 1 son and 1 daughter, and he loved them very much. Therefore, Nan Yifan specially made a lot of preparations to be able to contact them anytime and anywhere. But now, the connection was suddenly cut off. How could he not be anxious? Uncle Dan, something must have happened to them. Nan Yifan said resolutely. The old man called Uncle Dan also frowned. What about eldest young master? Nan Yifan's face darkened. He can't be contacted either. If not for this, he wouldn't be so nervous. Uncle Dan didn't expect the matter to be so serious and hurriedly tried to persuade him. Patriarch, don't worry. You see, they're still fine now, aren't they? As for why they can't be contacted, there must be a reason. I'll investigate immediately. With that, he turned around and planned to walk out. Nan Yifan put away the jade pendant and gritted his teeth. There's no need to investigate. Something must have happened in the god-slaying tomb. Other than this, he couldn't think of any other reason. He pondered for a moment, then walked out without any hesitation. I'll go to the god-slaying tomb personally. Uncle Dan was shocked. Patriarch, aren't you in too much of a hurry to go now? There's no time. Nan Yifan stopped in his tracks, and his face turned even uglier. Even if they encountered any trouble in the past, this has never happened before. This time, they must have encountered great danger. What kind of place is the god-slaying tomb? If we don't go there in time, I'm afraid it will be too late. Uncle Dan wanted to say something but hesitated. He was actually very worried about the situation of those people. But many people in the clan didn't know about them going there this time. If the patriarch went there, the news would definitely spread like wildfire. At that time, he was afraid, Uncle Dan, now is not the time to care about that. If something really happened to Yuxing and Nan Yifan didn't finish his sentence. But his expression said it all. No matter what the consequences were, as long as she was fine, everything was fine. But if he was gone, then there would be nothing left. At that time, he wouldn't even have the chance to make up for it or regret it. Uncle Dan was shocked and immediately lowered his head. Patriarch is right, this old servant was muddle-headed. Nan Yifan waved his hand. I know you're looking out for the big picture, but this matter involves the god-slaying mound. I'm afraid you can't care about that. He frowned and thought for a moment. Please invite Luo Yen and the others to come with us. Uncle Dan was stunned for a moment. Then he bowed respectfully. Yes. Even with Elder Wu Peng and Elder Bai Tong accompanying him, something still happened. Most likely, the situation over there was even more complicated than he had expected. The more people there, the safer it would be. Uncle Dan opened the door and went out. His figure soon disappeared from sight. Nan Yifan paced back and forth, waiting anxiously. This happened too suddenly. They didn't even have time to send out any distress signals before they were directly. What kind of situation was this? Nan Yifan didn't dare to think too much. There had always been various rumors about the god-slaying mound. But the 2 times he had been there in the past, he had been scared but not in danger, so he had always felt that the god-slaying mound was not as scary as the rumors said. Until this time, he began to regret it secretly. It was still a little risky to only send Elder Wu Peng and Elder Bai Tong there. If only he had known, but there was no medicine for regret in this world. The only thing he could do now was to silently pray that those people would be safe before they arrived at the god-slaying mound. Soon, Uncle Dan rushed over with a few people. Nan Yifan quickly glanced around and was stunned. Where's Luo Yan? In the entire Nan family, Luo Yan's combat strength could be ranked in the top 5, and he had always doted on Nan. So this time, Nan Yifan had made up his mind to bring Luo Yan with him from the beginning. Uncle Dan's expression was a little strange. Luo Yan is not here. Not here? He has always been obsessed with cultivation and rarely goes out. Why is he suddenly not here? Suddenly, Nan Yifan's voice stopped. There was only one reason that could make Luo Yan leave so quietly. Could it be, seeing that he seemed to have guessed it, Uncle Dan nodded helplessly. He seems to have already left for the god-slaying mound. As expected. For a moment, Nan Yifan's mood became even more complicated. Luo Yan had gone, so logically speaking Yi and the others had gained a great helper. But why did something still happen? And judging from the time, they seemed to have met with an accident after Luo Yan's arrival. This made Nan Yifan even more worried. He suppressed all the emotions that were surging in his chest and abdomen. He didn't hesitate any longer and directly moved out. Uncle Dan, stay here and deal with the family affairs. The rest of you, follow me. No matter what, he had to bring Yi and the others back safely. Phoenix Shrine. In the main hall, Yi Zhao sat at the head of the table, and the elders were divided into two sides. Only 4 of the 5 elders came today. Elder Yi Gong did not appear here. Yi Zhao glanced at the empty seat. Yi Gong is still not here today? Elder Yi Jiao looked a little embarrassed and responded in a low voice. Yes. Ever since Iran's accident, First Elder has been sad and hasn't adjusted his emotions. The few people present had different expressions. How was he sad for Iran? He was clearly sad that his years of hard work had gone up in smoke. All these years, he had devoted himself to nurturing Iran and had spent a lot of effort. How could he accept such an outcome? Yi Zhao couldn't be bothered to expose him and nodded lightly. Then let him rest well. Anyway, even if he didn't come, it wouldn't affect them much. After that, they reported and summarized some of the clan's matters as usual. Yi Zhao made the decisions one by one. In fact, since the end of the ancestral worship ceremony, nothing major had happened at Phoenix Shrine Mountain. Recently, the children in the clan seemed to be cultivating more diligently than before. Elder Yi Shang smiled and said, probably because they were stimulated by Dumpling at the ancestral worship ceremony. At the mention of Dumpling, a smile appeared on Yi Zhao's icy face. Dumpling is younger than them, but much stronger. Of course, they can't be completely unmoved. It's not bad that they have the heart to catch up. Unfortunately, no one knew when Dumpling would return after leaving. Yi Zhao thought regretfully. Suddenly, a reddish-gold feather floated in the main hall. His expression changed and he suddenly stood up. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1699. The feather lightly drew a line of words in the air. Grandpa Clan Leader, come save me and you. After seeing the line of words, Yi Zhao's eyes narrowed. Soon, the line of words transformed into a red-gold flame in the air and quietly disappeared. As for the feather, it was destroyed as well. Everyone in the main hall was shocked. This is Dumpling's request for help? Elder Yi Shang asked uncertainly. Yi Zhao's expression was grave. That's right. Who else could send a request for help from so far away other than Dumpling? Looks like something happened to them. If not for the desperate situation, Dumpling would never have taken the initiative to ask for their help. Elder Yi stood up, straightened his collar, and said with a smile, it's rare that little Dumpling would take the initiative to ask us for help. Of course, we have to support her. Clan leader, how about I make a trip? Dumpling had already opened her 4th meridian. As one of the 5 elders, it was easy for him to find Dumpling. Yi Zhao nodded. After they left Phoenix God Mountain, they seemed to have gone straight to the god-slaying mound. Elder Yi nodded. He had just taken a step when he suddenly stopped. Clan leader, young lord is asking for help. Should we send a few more people? The god-slaying mound was very strange and dangerous. He could not guarantee that he could bring them out safely. Yi Zhao's lips moved, but he did not say anything. It was as though he wanted to say something. The remaining elders looked at each other in dismay. There was nothing to hesitate about. What was the clan leader thinking? Elder Yi Shang also stood up. You still have to deal with Fenghuang Valley. Let me go this time. He was the second elder and was more powerful than the fifth elder, Elder Yu. Other than that, I will find. Second elder, please don't. Elder Yu stroked his chin and sighed. Most of the matters at Fenghuang Valley have already been settled. Even if I leave now, it will not affect much. Besides, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to improve her relationship with Tuanzi. If I miss this chance, who knows when I will get another one? Don't snatch it from me? He was the youngest of the 5 great elders, and he had always been straightforward in his words and actions. Over time, everyone had gotten used to it. Elder Yishang could not help but laugh and shake his head helplessly. But how can you do it by yourself? Or, before he could finish his sentence, Yi Zhao interrupted. I will go with him. As soon as he finished speaking, the hall instantly fell into silence. The elders looked at each other in dismay. Clearly, they did not expect that he would actually plan to go personally. Elder Yishang was stunned for a moment before he asked hesitantly. Elder Yu, you are going? Under normal circumstances, Yi Zhao would rarely leave the divine Phoenix Mountain unless something major happened. After all, he was the clan leader. His every word and action had great influence. Yi Zhao nodded expressionlessly. This is a serious matter. It is safer for me to go with Yu. He was always a man of his word. His attitude and tone were very firm. The elders in the hall did not stop him. Dumpling was the young lord and was appointed by their ancestors. They had to protect her no matter what. It was understandable that Yi Zhao would go. After making the decision, Yi Zhao and Elder Yu did not hesitate. They set off for the god-slaying grave. At this point, Chu Luiyue naturally had no idea what was happening in the outside world. In the dim space, a ray of light shone down from above. Chu Luiyue sat cross-legged and held a transparent piece of paper in his hand. On the paper, dazzling light flashed. It was beautiful. However, Chu Luiyue was not in the mood to admire it. Her eyes were fixed on the paper. She carefully observed the trajectory and pattern of the flowing light, afraid that she would miss something. This was actually a very taxing task, and he couldn't afford to slack off at all. At the same time, the force around her was rapidly depleting. She frowned slightly. Her lips were pale and she looked haggard. However, she still held the paper in her hand tightly. She did not dare to close her eyes and rest. The ground around her was littered with papers. Although they were also transparent, there was no dazzling light on them. Every one of them was cracked and seemed to be useless. Chu Luiyue had seen those before. They were fake. They were all fake. Among the tens of thousands of papers, only one was real. She had only seen about 100 of them. How could she find the real one so easily? Here, she was focused on studying every zither score. She almost could not feel the passage of time. Only the increasing pressure and pain on her body constantly reminded her that time was passing by. The only thing worth being happy about was that she was reading faster than before. Previously, she read one every 3 days. Now, she read one every 2.5 days. However, this happiness did not last long. Because in addition to holding on to these real and fake music scores, Chu Luiyue also had to endure the test of the zither. Since Jing began to play the zither, Chu Luiyue was shrouded in a terrifying murderous aura. There was almost no room for relaxation in this song. From beginning to end, it was full of fighting spirit and murderous aura. In a trance, Chu Luiyue felt that she was in a vast world. The sky was dark, the clouds were rolling and the wind was roaring. In the boundless wilderness, countless people were killing each other. Their shouts shook the sky and their momentum was shocking. Looking around, there were messy bloodstains and cold corpses everywhere. Everywhere was filled with a chill. It was like purgatory on earth. She could even smell the strong and terrible smell of blood. It was almost nauseating. It wasn't that she had never seen a battle before. She had even fought on the battlefield herself, killing countless people in the midst of life and death with the flash of her blade and the shadow of her sword. She had seen the scene of corpses strewn all over the place more than once. However, that scene paled in comparison to the scene that was constantly emerging in her mind. It was not worth mentioning at all. She wanted to throw all these images out of her mind, but it was in vain. Because all of this was a part of the song. Therefore, she could only choose to accept it. She constantly forced herself to concentrate all her energy and listen to every note of the song. This was undoubtedly an extremely cruel torture for Chu Luiyue. Her whole body seemed to be cut in half. Half of her attention was focused on the music score in her hand, while the other half was constantly experiencing the bloody and terrible things. Finally, a stream of red blood slowly overflowed from the corner of her mouth. It dripped on the back of her hand. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1700. Chu Luiyue reached out her other hand nonchalantly and quickly wiped away the drop of blood. And her eyes, from beginning to end, did not move away from the score. Although it was painful and difficult, she knew that this was the path she had chosen from the beginning. No matter what, she had to continue walking on her own. She finally finished reading the piece in her hand. Chu Luiyue pursed her lips. Still not. But there was no disappointment on her face. She rubbed the piece a few times and threw it on the ground. The moment she finished reading it, the luster on it had already disappeared. At this moment, it was lying there quietly, no different from a piece of waste paper. Chu Luiyue raised her hand without hesitation, picked up another piece, and continued reading. In fact, she was already prepared to flip through all the music scores here. Her only hope was that time could flow faster. When she didn't want to go out, decades had already passed outside. This thought flashed through her mind quickly, then she quickly suppressed it. Clang. The zither didn't stop. Cultivation didn't stop. Big brother? Uncle Luoyen? Elder Wupeng? Elder Bai Tong? In the dark and cramped space, Nanyi's legs went weak. She slowly squatted down and hugged herself. Deep despair surged from the bottom of her heart and gradually drowned her. There was no response. Still no response. She couldn't remember how long she had been walking here, but she couldn't find the exit. She didn't know how many times she had shouted until her voice was hoarse, but she still didn't get any response. It was as if there was no one else here except for her. The surroundings were terrifyingly quiet. She could even hear her own breathing and heartbeat. This made her even more afraid. She was trapped here for the rest of her life. What should she do? She didn't want to die yet. Nanyi finally couldn't hold it in anymore and sobbed softly. And in the depths of her heart, her hatred for Chu Luiyue deepened. If it wasn't for that woman, how could she have fallen to such a state? Everything was fine at first, but ever since she met them, she had been unlucky. Now, it was even more likely that he would have to throw his life away. She didn't know where the hell this place was. Ever since she was swallowed here, she had lost contact with everyone else. More importantly, he couldn't even send out a request for help here. Right now, her only hope was her father. But before that, even she wasn't sure if she could hold on. After crying for a while, Nanyi was tired and sat down on the ground. However, as soon as she sat down, she felt something beneath her. She was shocked and screamed as she jumped up. Ah! Sharp screams reverberated in this silent space, seeming especially mournful and terrifying. Nanyi hurriedly covered her mouth and looked at the ground in panic. When she saw what it was, she sucked in a breath of cold air and suddenly opened her eyes wide. That was actually half a bone. Because most of the bones were buried underground and the exposed part seemed to be broken from the middle, Nanyi was unable to recognize what kind of bones they were. The only thing he could be sure of was that it belonged to a human cultivator. Also, the bone was lustrous and one could tell at a glance that its owner's realm was not low when he was alive. But how could Nanyi care about this now? She stared fixedly at the half of the white bone. Her mind was in a mess, and her mind was in a mess. Why was there such a bone here? She didn't notice it at all before. She didn't know who it belonged to. She had walked in the divine ruins for so long and had never seen half a bone. Not the weight. At this thought, Nanyi's mind finally cleared up. There must be a problem here. She had traveled day and night in the divine ruins with Big Brother and the others. They had walked so far and there was nothing but broken tombstones all over the ground. This was the first bone she had seen in the god-slaying tomb. But why would it appear here? She stared at the bone for a long time and finally couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. Suddenly, a weak and hoarse voice entered her ears. "Let me out. I can take you out." Nan Yi's heart skipped a beat. She took 2 steps back and stared at the bone as if she had seen a ghost. "She was sure that your voice just now came from below." Who are you?" Because of fear, her voice trembled badly. After a pause, the voice sounded again. "You don't need to know. You just need to know that I can help you leave this place. Do you want to make this deal or not?" This tone was terrifyingly calm, but it also carried a force that made people unconsciously believe in it. Nan Yi tried her best to calm herself down. If I help you, can you guarantee that you won't hurt me after we get out?" The voice seemed to laugh. "You're not worthy of me doing it myself." It seemed that he didn't take Nan Yi seriously at all. Nan Yi was furious, but she didn't dare to flare up. On second thought, this person might really not be an ordinary person. "Since you don't like me, why ask me for help?" The other party was silent for a moment before saying, "Of course it's because you can help me. You can take out that thing around your neck and use it." Nan Yi's heart skipped a beat and she subconsciously touched the chain around her neck. Only father and big brother knew about this thing. How could he tell so easily? As if sensing her hesitation, the other party continued. "You have to know that without my help, you won't be able to get out even if you're trapped here for more than 100 years. These words finally made Nan Yi make up her mind. She gritted her teeth. "Okay, I'll help you. However, you have to keep your promise to me." As she spoke, she finally took off the chain around her neck. It was an ordinary-looking silver chain. It was very thin and decorated with a fingernail-sized ruby. It was dark red in color and pure in texture. Even if an ordinary person saw it, they would only think that it was an ordinary ruby necklace. Nan Yi held the ruby in her hand and closed her eyes. Soon, a totem flashed between her brows. A short sword suddenly flew out from the ruby. Its entire body was bright and extremely sharp. Nan Yi grabbed the short sword and dug it into the ground. A deep mark quickly appeared on the ground. Nan Yi didn't stop. After a while, the ground around the bone completely loosened. Swoosh! The bone suddenly darted out. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1701. Before Nan Yi could react, she suddenly felt a strong force attacking her. Immediately after, her body fell forward uncontrollably. At this moment, the darkness in front of her was suddenly cut open by a white light. She subconsciously closed her eyes. At this moment, her body suddenly fell. Outside the Scarlet Soul Forest. In the void, a few ripples suddenly spread out rapidly. Immediately after, a few figures walked out one after another. The person in front was dressed in a dark purple robe and had a cold expression. It was the head of the Nan family, Nan Yifan. Behind him were 4 elders of the family. As soon as he arrived, Nan Yifan quickly scanned the surroundings and frowned. He sensed the aura of Nan Yi and the others. After looking for a while, he lifted his foot and walked towards a certain place in the Scarlet Soul Forest. They should have entered the Scarlet Soul Forest from here. The elders behind him hurriedly followed. Because they knew that this matter involved Nan Yuxing and Nan Yi, they didn't dare to say anything in front of Nan Yifan. They would do whatever he said. The few of them quickly rushed over. However, just as Nan Yifan and the others were about to enter, there was a sudden fluctuation behind them. They immediately looked back and were on high alert. Who would come to the Godslayer tomb at this time? And it was the same place as them. A black spatial crack was suddenly torn open. Then 2 figures walked out one after another. When he saw the faces of the people who came, Nan Yifan was stunned. Wasn't this the head of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, Yi Zhao, and one of the 5 elders, Elder Yu? The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan almost never interacted with the human race. The reason why Nan Yifan could recognize them at a glance was because he had met them by chance in the past. Although it was only a one-time encounter, he had always remembered them clearly. So now that he saw these 2 familiar faces, he immediately remembered. Nan Yifan's hanging heart relaxed slightly, but at the same time, more questions arose. Why did they suddenly come to this place? There was no need to mention Elder Yu, but Yi Zhao rarely left the Phoenix God Mountain. Today, they had actually appeared together in the Scarlet Soul Forest outside the God-slaying tomb. It was hard not to overthink. However, no matter how he felt in his heart, he still had to put on a show. Nan Yifan quickly adjusted his expression, took a step forward, cupped his hands politely, and said with a smile, Isn't this Patriarch Yi Zhao? What wind blew you here? Compared to his enthusiasm, Yi Zhao's attitude was much colder. He only glanced at Nan Yifan indifferently, then quickly retracted his gaze, as if he had not seen this person at all. He only turned his head and said to Elder Yu, "They should have entered from here." Elder Yu nodded. Of course, they would not mistake Dumpling's aura. Why would I bump into someone from the Nan family here? He looked in that direction out of the corner of his eye, but did not respond to Nan Yifan's words. What a joke! The patriarch had always been blunt with the human clan. Now that Dumpling had an accident, time was even more pressing. How could he be in the mood to exchange pleasantries with Nan Yifan? Yi Zhao Duo's attitude made Nan Yifan very embarrassed. The smile on his face stiffened for a moment, but soon returned to normal. In fact, he had expected such a reaction from the other party. After so many years, which of the two great ancient mythological beasts did not have their eyes on the top of their heads and were extremely arrogant? Although he was not convinced the other party had such confidence, so he had to admit it. Nan Yifan had a noble status and was strong himself. For many years, it was almost always others who looked at him with disdain. There weren't many situations like this where he tried to curry favor with others and was even rejected by them. If it were someone else, they might have been lying on the ground. But the other party was Yi Zhao. He really could not afford to offend him. Nan Yifan swallowed his anger, pretended nothing had happened, and continued to ask, "Patriarch Yi Zhao, are you also here to look for someone?" These words attracted Elder Yu's attention. He raised his eyebrows. Also, Nan Yifan's heart tightened and he suddenly felt that he had misspoken. He had unconsciously said, "also." But thinking of the other party's identity, this matter did not seem to be a taboo. So what if they knew? Would Yi Zhao meddle in the affairs of the human clan? After thinking for a moment, Nan Yifan said frankly, "Yes, my daughter came to the god-slaying tomb some time ago, but there was suddenly no news of her today. I was worried, so I wanted to come over and take a look myself." He only mentioned Nan Yi and did not mention Nan Yuxing and the others. This was a serious matter. If the news of Nan Yuxing's accident also spread, the Nan family would probably be in chaos. Anyway, everyone knew that he had always doted on Nan Yi, so it was normal for him to make a special trip here for her. A look of understanding flashed across Elder Yu's eyes, but he did not reply. Nan Yifan could not help but ask, "May I know who the two of you are here to look for? The god-slaying tomb is vast and full of danger. If we join forces, we might be able to find her faster?" Yes, he wanted to join forces with Yi Zhao. Although the other party was few in number, they were powerful. Moreover, it would be even better if he could use this opportunity to get closer to the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. He had wishful thinking, but Yi Zhao was not interested at all. He didn't even spare her a glance, and with a cold and solemn expression on his face, he lifted his foot and walked towards the Scarlet Soul Forest. Nan Yifan was rebuffed, and his face was also a little embarrassed. But Yi Zhao was famous for his bad temper and arrogance. Even if he was angry, he did not dare to do anything to him. Besides, the most important thing now was to find Nan Yi and the others. Behind him, several elders secretly exchanged glances and did not dare to breathe loudly. Nan Yifan clenched his fists and took a deep breath. "All right, let's hurry up." After saying that, he lifted his foot and walked forward. As they walked, they all sensed that something was wrong. Nan Yifan's expression became more and more strange, and his footsteps became hesitant. This direction. Why was it the same as Yi Zhao and the others? Almost at the same time, Elder Yu also turned around and looked at Nan Yifan with a faint smile. "Patriarch Nan, if you want to find someone, go ahead." Why do you have to go with us? Nan Yifan felt embarrassed and braced himself to explain. Elder Yu, it's really a misunderstanding. We didn't mean to follow you, but my daughter and the others seem to have entered the god-slaying tomb from here, so. Seeing that he did not seem to be lying, Elder Yu glanced at Yizhao hesitantly. The Crimson Soul Forest was so big. Where could they not enter from? This was too much of a coincidence, wasn't it? Nan Yifan immediately realized something when he saw this reaction. Patriarch Yizhao, maybe the person you were looking for went in with Yi and the others? There was a trace of excitement in his expression. I think it's more convenient for us to move together, don't you think? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1702. Yizhao frowned slightly. After a moment, he continued to walk forward without saying anything. Elder Yu was best at guessing his thoughts and understood that this was a tacit agreement. Although they did not interact much with humans, the situation this time was a little special. Nan Yifan's words were not completely unreasonable. It was not that easy to quickly find Dumpling and the rest in this huge Godslayer mound. If the people they were looking for entered the Godslayer mound together, it might be faster. Elder Yu smiled. In that case, Patriarch Nan, please. Nan Yifan's eyes lit up. They agreed? He was just trying, but he did not expect them to really agree. This made Nan Yifan's originally anxious and uneasy heart feel a lot more comforted. The Nan family was indeed big and powerful. However, compared to the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, they were still inferior. Now that they could move together with Yizhao and the rest, it could be considered a friendship. Even in the entire Divine Ruins world, how many people could do that? Okay, but Nan Yifan hurriedly responded and followed them. Originally, he wanted to go over and talk to Yizhao, but Elder Yu was in the middle and it was really difficult to communicate. Moreover, Yizhao's aura was heavy and ordinary people could not even get close to him. Nan Yifan saw that his expression was cold and did not seem to be in a good mood. After thinking about it, he tactfully did not disturb him and just quietly followed a few steps away. They could not use force in the Crimson Soul Forest, so they naturally walked forward step by step. As they walked, Nan Yifan kept thinking in his heart. Who exactly did Yizhao and the rest come here to find? Although they hid it very well, Nan Yifan still saw the trace of worry in their eyes. They were definitely not here to seek revenge. It looked more like they were looking for someone important. Nan Yifan was even more puzzled. There were not many people in the world who could alarm Yizhao, right? He was probably an important person in the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Nan Yifan was nervous and uneasy, but there was also a trace of anticipation in his heart. Perhaps Yi and the others had really bumped into the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan? If they really encountered some trouble together and went through difficulties together, their relationship might be able to take another step forward. Thinking of this, Nan Yifan's mood immediately relaxed a lot. He had never considered whether Nan Yi and the rest would offend the other party. What a joke! Even if she couldn't recognize the other party, Elder Wu Ping and the others were here, so they would definitely be able to see through the other party's identity. They couldn't wait to curry favor with the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix clan, so how could they possibly oppose the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix clan? However, things were often unpredictable. Nan Yifan couldn't have imagined what kind of cruel reality would await him. Suddenly, Yizhao stopped in his tracks and stared straight ahead. Nan Yifan had no choice but to stop as well. He tilted his head and followed his line of sight. What he saw made him frown. The forest not far ahead was a mess. It seemed that a fierce battle had broken out here. But this place was the Scarlet Soul Forest. Fighting here, wasn't it seeking death? Suddenly, an elder at the side exclaimed, "Patriarch! That seems to be eldest young master's clothes." Nan Yifan was shocked and hurriedly took a few steps forward to take a closer look. When he saw the torn corners of the clothes scattered on the ground and the messy bloodstains, Nan Yifan's mind buzzed. It really was Yuxing's clothes. Did he fight here? But he clearly knew that he couldn't use force in the Scarlet Soul Forest. How could he have caused such a big trouble for himself? The few scarlet leaves scattered on the ground dispelled Nen Yifun's last hope. There were no fallen leaves in the entire Scarlet Soul Forest. Only this place had them. Something must have happened. Patriarch, don't be anxious. Maybe this blood isn't Eldest Young Master's? Eldest Young Master is powerful, and Elder Wu Peng and the others are accompanying him. He'll definitely be fine. Nan Yifun clenched his fists. Nan Yuxing and the rest were indeed not in danger, but judging from the situation, they must have been injured. He just didn't know what had happened to cause such a situation. Elder Yu touched his chin. Patriarch, this bloodstain doesn't have Dumpling's aura. Yi Zhao nodded. This Scarlet Soul Forest might be very dangerous to humans, but it wasn't a threat to Dumpling. It would be strange if she was injured here. Most likely, she met with trouble after entering the god-slaying mound. Yi Zhao glanced at the mess on the ground expressionlessly before continuing to walk forward. He naturally wouldn't care too much about irrelevant people and things. Nan Yifun clenched his fists and finally shifted his gaze away and followed him. They weren't here. The most important thing now was to enter the god-slaying mound and find their traces. The place where they found the bloodstain was actually at the edge of the Scarlet Soul Forest. They just needed to walk forward a little more and they would be out. Unfortunately, something happened to Nan Yuxing and the rest. Nen Yifun felt depressed and his face became gloomier. After a while, the group finally walked out of the Scarlet Soul Forest in silence. The view in front of them suddenly widened. The sky was gray with thick layers of clouds. Looking into the distance, there was an endless plain. A cold and gloomy aura instantly hit them in the face. Faintly, one could smell a trace of desolate blood. Nan Yifun's heart skipped a beat. Behind him, an elder couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Patriarch, don't you feel that the god-slaying mound seems a little different? Nan Yifun nodded. It was indeed different. He had been here before, but he had never felt such a strong, gloomy and cold aura between heaven and earth. It almost made people tremble from the bottom of their hearts. He couldn't tell what the difference was, but it had changed. Elder Yu walked to Zhao's side. The smile on his face gradually faded and there was a hint of coldness and seriousness between his brows. The evil aura here is even stronger, he said. Yi Zhao nodded. This wasn't a good sign. They had just entered the god-slaying mound, but they already felt such a shocking evil aura. If they continued to go in, no wonder Dumpling chose to ask for help. Yi Zhao looked around and vaguely determined a direction. When Nan Yifun saw this, he gritted his teeth and chose to follow closely behind. At this point, he couldn't detect the aura of those people at all. But the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan was different. They had amazing talent and sensitivity in this aspect. The god-slaying mound was so big, and Nan Yuxing and the rest had completely cut off contact with him. The best way was to follow Yi Zhao and the rest. At this time, Yi Zhao was thinking about Dumpling and didn't pay attention to Nan Yifun at all. Just like this, the group of people headed into the depths of the god-slaying mound. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1703. Time passed silently. Chu Luiwei held a transparent music score tightly in her hands. The dazzling light on it almost dazzled her eyes. From the beginning until now, she had not stopped at all and looked at it one by one. The force in her body was also being consumed rapidly in this process. However, every time her force was exhausted, the transparent remnant page in her dantian would surge with more force and pour into her limbs and bones. This was the force that she had been accumulating over the years. With the support of this force, Chu Luiwei was able to hold on until now. Moreover, when this force flowed through her body, it was like a surging river that constantly washed her flesh and bones. Imperceptibly, her physical body was becoming stronger and stronger with each tempering. In other words, on the whole, Chu Luiwei's strength was actually increasing all the time. However, this process was too painful and torturous. Every time her energy was exhausted, she felt like a fish on the verge of death, struggling desperately. After receiving the support of this new force, this pain would slowly lessen. However, this would not last for long because this force would still be consumed quickly. Therefore, a new cycle began again. Again and again, over and over again. Chu Luiwei could not remember how many times she had gone through this extreme process. Moreover, all of this was still going on, and there was no sign of it stopping. Needless to say, the chilling sound of the zither was still lingering in her ears. To anyone, this was an extremely torturous experience. If one's mind was not firm enough, perhaps they would have already been defeated. Chu Luiwei could only rely on her last bit of willpower to grit her teeth and persevere. On the surface, she seemed to be no different from before. She was still fine from head to toe, except for a little blood stain at the corner of her mouth, which was not eye-catching. However, in reality, the inside of her body had already been turned upside down. And in her mind, she was experiencing a terrible storm. The sound of the zither kept reverberating in her ears, as if she could see corpses everywhere, and the smell of blood filling the sky. The blood in Chu Luiwei's body also seemed to be boiling. Her body began to tremble slightly, and the music score in her hand fell. Clang. The sound of the zither suddenly stopped. Jing looked at her and asked calmly, "Do you want to take a break?" She was already at her limit. Chu Luiwei said slowly and firmly. "No, no need." Her voice was very weak, but it carried a hint of persistence. Then, she picked up the music score that had fallen to the ground. Even though her hands were trembling, she still held it tightly, her knuckles turning white. Jing's hand gently pressed on the strings of the zither. He smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to force yourself like this. It was no big deal to rest for a while. Furthermore, your reading speed is already very fast." She had improved a lot and performed better than he had expected. "Or should I help you adjust the flow of time? That way, you'll be able to relax a lot." Now that the flow of time was too fast, the pressure on her was also multiplied. As long as she slowed down, her condition would be much better. "Thank you, Senior Jing. You don't have to worry about me." Chu Luiwei shook her head again and rejected his suggestion. Now, she only hoped that she could integrate the music score as quickly as possible and then go out to meet Rong Xiu and the others, so that they would not be too worried. Although the process was torturous, she could still bear it. Jing stared at her for a while, then helplessly curled his lips and sighed softly. "You're really stubborn. Not to mention other things, this kind of temperament was extremely rare. Such a person would do her best in everything. How could she not succeed?" His fingertips strummed the strings, and the music started again. In an instant, the bloody scene of the battle appeared in her mind again. Suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind. These scenes did not seem to be illusory. In the dark and lonely space, Rong Xiu stood silently. He closed his eyes, covering his mesmerizing eyes. Then, the cluster of golden flames in his palm quickly spread around his body. In a short while, his entire body was completely enveloped by the flames. That incomparably noble face, under the illumination of the brilliant firelight, was suffused with a jade-like luster. A totem gradually appeared between his eyebrows. Holy, noble, and unattainable. At the same time, the figure in the huge mirror in front of him was also enveloped by the black flames. Powerful, domineering, and awe-inspiring. A totem gradually appeared between his eyebrows. However, that totem was completely different from the one between Rong Xiu's eyebrows outside the mirror. But this totem only flashed for a moment before it was enveloped by the surrounding black flames. Then Rong Xiu stretched out his hand and reached for the mirror. Nanny only felt that her body was constantly falling. Other than the whistling of the wind, she could not hear anything else. After an unknown period of time, she finally fell to the ground. Bang! There was a muffled sound. The ground was hard, and she almost fractured her bones when she fell. Hiss! She sucked in a breath of cold air from the pain. But before she could finish gasping, a corner of crimson clothes entered her peripheral vision. She was shocked and hurriedly looked up. Not far in front of her, a piece of white bone was lying quietly on the ground. It was slender and smooth, stained with black and red blood, and looked like a human forearm bone. However, this was not the reason that truly shocked Nanny, but there was actually a translucent figure standing on that white bone. It was a man who looked to be in his 40s. He was thin and had an ordinary face. He was the kind of existence that no one would remember after a glance. However, when his gaze swept over, Nanny suddenly felt a chill all over her body. An indescribable cold fear suddenly rose from the bottom of her heart. With just one look, she was certain that this man was definitely not to be trifled with. "Why, you're the person who spoke to me just now?" Nanny asked nervously. The middle-aged man did not answer this meaningless question. He only sized her up and said indifferently, "Name." Nanny was stunned for a moment before she realized that he was asking for her name. Seeing that the other party didn't seem to have any intention of attacking her, she said hesitantly, "Nanny, you're from the Nan family?" The man looked enlightened. "No wonder you have such a treasure on you." Nanny heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that the other party knew about her family background. In this case, he should have some scruples and wouldn't attack casually, right? "Don't worry, since I promised to bring you out, I won't go back on my word." Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1704. After all, Nanny was young and inexperienced, so all her thoughts were written on her face. Everything she was thinking about was easily seen through by the other party. Nanny pursed her lips. Although she didn't know the other party's identity, his words and actions were rather magnanimous. Especially when he spoke, his expression was calm, but it inexplicably made people feel like they were bathed in a spring breeze. It was very comfortable. She unconsciously let down her guard and nodded. Then, "Thank you very much, Senior. By the way, how should I address you?" The man said indifferently, "I've been trapped here for 1,000 years. It's no longer important to call me by my name." Nanny was shocked again. Trapped for 1,000 years? Wasn't it a little too long ago? She looked up. Actually, she had many questions she wanted to ask the other party, such as his identity and background, why was he trapped here, and why was he residing in a bone, but she didn't need to say anything. Judging from the other party's expression, she knew that he definitely wouldn't say anything. "Senior, how did you know that I could help you out?" She was actually asking how he knew that she had that short sword on her. She was really curious about this question. That short sword was the most precious treasure she had. The necklace around her neck looked like an ordinary piece of ruby jewelry, but in fact, it was an interspatial ring that his father had specially made for the short sword. There was only one thing in it. Her father had said that she absolutely couldn't use it unless it was a life-and-death situation. So all these years, she had never taken it out. However, this man had recognized her immediately. How could Nan-e not be puzzled? She asked carefully, but the man didn't seem to take this matter to heart at all. He seemed to laugh and said indifferently, "I've seen countless divine artifacts in my life. I've seen countless divine artifacts in my life. How could I not recognize yours?" In other words, he didn't seem to think that the short sword in Nanny's hand was very precious. Nanny choked and felt a little angry and aggrieved. Their Nan family was one of the top existences in the Divine Ruins world. Even those first-rate families had to give them face. Something that they regarded as a treasure was naturally a real treasure. This man's tone was so arrogant that he was most likely bragging. But of course, she didn't dare to show her dissatisfaction and could only respond. It seemed that she wouldn't be able to get anything out of this man. She thought to herself, "Go this way." The man suddenly spoke, startling Nanny. She looked in the direction that the man was pointing at and realized that there seemed to be a faint light coming from that direction. Previously, she was full of thoughts about this man and didn't notice this. Her heart skipped a beat. "That's the exit?" The man beside her. "If it's really that easy, why would I be trapped here for over 1,000 years? Wasn't she a little?" Nanny could hear the mockery in his words. Her face heated up and she felt very embarrassed. Simply speaking, this is a huge. There are countless paths that divide this place into countless spaces, but there is only one path that leads out of this place. He glanced at Nanny. "You didn't come in alone, right?" His status was not low, and his talent was not bad. Unfortunately, It was not enough in this place. The Nan family would never let her come alone. Nan Yi nodded hesitantly. Then, she suddenly raised her head and looked at the other party expectantly. Senior, my big brother and the rest are here too. Can you help me find? No. Before Nan Yi could finish speaking, the man interrupted her indifferently and gave a firm negative answer. Nan Yi choked. I can give you a generous reward. As long as you are willing to help, we will definitely reward you greatly after we get out. The man glanced at her with undisguised sarcasm and arrogance. Do you know how much space there is here? Even if they came in with you, they aren't in the same place as you, right? Do you think it's so easy to find someone here? You have to know that even if they are next to you and are only separated by a wall, it's extremely difficult for you to see them. I promised to bring you out, but I didn't say that I would help others. The other party's tone was firm and cold. Nan Yi's heart, which was originally full of hope, gradually sank. If you still want to go out, follow behind me quietly for the rest of the time. Nan Yi's nails dug into her palms and she lowered her eyes. I understand. Yi Zhao and the rest were still walking on the wasteland. Because he was worried about Dumpling and Chu Luiwei, he and Elder Yi were very fast. This made the people behind them suffer. Nan Yifan was still fine, but the two elders behind him were obviously starting to be unable to keep up. Their faces gradually turned pale and their foreheads were already covered in fine beads of sweat. Nan Yifan couldn't help but frown when he saw this scene. He then glanced at Yi Zhao and Elder Yi, as expected of the pure gold heavenly phoenix. This kind of strength was truly peerless. The few of them were actually not weak, but in front of Yi Zhao and the rest, they were still not worth mentioning. The two of them didn't even have the slightest change in expression and looked extremely relaxed. Looking at them, the comparison was really tragic. Nan Yifan's mood became very complicated. As one of the two ancient divine beasts, the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan had always been very arrogant. As the clan leader, Yi Zhao was even more so. He had almost no contact with the human race for many years. When he first saw Yi Zhao and the rest, Nan Yifan was polite and respectful on the surface, but he was still a little unconvinced in his heart. But now, he finally understood that the other party did indeed have the right to be arrogant. It seemed that in the future he had to be more careful when dealing with Yi Zhao and the entire Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. Elder Yi noticed the strangeness of Nan Yifan and the rest, but he only curled his lips and smiled playfully, not taking it to heart. As for the strength of these people, he had more or less guessed it at first glance. It was normal for them to be weak and unable to keep up. In the human race, these people, including Nan Yifan, might be considered top-notch in terms of talent and strength. But this was still not enough to enter their eyes. The Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan was an ancient divine beast born in the chaos. The power of their bloodline was almost invincible. How could ordinary humans compare to them? So what if they were strong venerables? They still couldn't even enter the gate of their Phoenix God Mountain. All these years, the only one who could make them look at them in a new light was that Shangguanyu. Yi Zhao suddenly stopped. Elder Yi put away his thoughts. Clan leader? Yi Zhao raised his hand. They are over there. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1705. Elder Yu narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction Yi Zhao was pointing. He was slightly stunned. In the distance, in the vast wilderness, there were countless messy and broken tombstones. Even though there was still some distance between them, they could still clearly feel the dense and cold aura of suppression from where they were standing. Oppressive, heavy, majestic. The air was filled with a desolate and thick smell of blood. It was frightening. This is the tombs of the exalted gods? Elder Yu murmured. Clan leader, do you mean? Yi Zhao raised his chin. No, look again. Elder Yu was stunned for a moment before he looked even further into the distance. Only then did he see that there seemed to be an unusual black color at the point where the sky and the earth met. That's a wall? Elder Yu widened his eyes. Hearing his words, Nan Yifan and the others immediately looked in that direction. However, their eyesight was not as good as Elder Yu's. They could not compare to Yizhao's, so they could only see a black line. However, Nan Yifan's face was still filled with shock. There was indeed a wall in the Divine Ruins world. Rumor had it that it appeared in the earth-shattering battle tens of thousands of years ago. It was said that the wall contained endless power and could separate heaven and earth. All the cultivators who participated in the battle back then died, and countless treasures were destroyed. Only this wall was strong and sturdy and had been preserved. Before this, Nan Yifan had only heard of the existence of this wall in rumors. He had never seen it before. Therefore, when he saw it from afar, he could not hide his excitement. However, Yizhao's next sentence made his heart turn cold. They should be inside. The moment he said that, the surroundings fell silent. Inside? What inside? The few of them looked at each other blankly. They saw the confusion, suspicion, and disbelief in each other's eyes. Although Elder Yu was not as shocked as Nan Yifan and the others, he also frowned. You're saying they're inside that wall? Yizhao nodded. How is that possible? Nan Yifan finally had no one to stop him from speaking. Clan leader Yizhao, are you saying that they are behind that wall? How could a perfectly good wall contain people? Moreover, the reason why this wall was so famous was because it was exceptionally sturdy. Not only did it not collapse during the bloody battle back then, it even stood tenaciously between heaven and earth after experiencing tens of thousands of years of wind, frost, and rain. It would be difficult for an average person to even leave a hole in the wall, let alone others. Wasn't this too strange? Yi Zhao didn't even look at him, as if he hadn't heard his question at all. He walked straight to the wall. Elder Yu immediately followed after him. However, the smile on his face had already disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a rare solemn and serious expression. Nan Yifan didn't get an answer, but he didn't have time to feel aggrieved. This was because he could tell that Yi Zhao and Yu Yuehan seemed to be a little nervous. I'm afraid things are going to get troublesome. Nan Yifan's heart also hung in the air. If the person Yi Zhao and the others were looking for was trapped in that wall, then would Yi and the others also? This thought made him feel a strong sense of uneasiness. He took a deep breath and waved at them. Follow me. The tombs of the exalted god were silent. Yi Zhao and the others passed through in silence. The process was long and torturous. Moreover, the closer they got, the more they could feel the astonishing pressure and evil aura. The tombs of the exalted god should be in front. Elder Yu whispered. The wall was in the tombs of the exalted god. The further they went, the closer they got to the wall. Naturally, they could see it more clearly. Nan Yifan gritted his teeth and walked, staring straight at the black wall in front of him that was getting clearer. The wall was extremely tall and stood there quietly. He couldn't see the end of it on either side. He didn't know how long this wall was. Why hadn't he seen it before when he came here? Plop. A muffled voice came from behind. Nan Yifan turned around to look. One of the elders who came with him fell to the ground with a pale face. Ma, Patriarch. Before he could finish his sentence, his chest shook and he spat out a mouthful of blood. The bloodstains were dark red, making his face look even more haggard and miserable. Nan Yifan's face darkened. An elder next to him couldn't help but say, Patriarch, the evil aura on the wall is too terrifying. I'm afraid Elder Jinming can't hold on. I'm afraid the rest of us will also. This wasn't an insult, but it was the truth. They knew each other's strength the best. They had already come this far, and no one wanted to stop here. If it wasn't for the fact that they had no other choice, they wouldn't have. Nan Yifan closed his eyes and said, You and Elder Jinming stay here and wait. Don't go any further. The road ahead was dangerous, and he couldn't gamble with his elder's life. The two elders were hesitant at first, but in the end, they chose to nod and agree. They knew that they were at the end of their rope. If they forced themselves to follow, they would only be a burden. Patriarch, you must be careful. Nan Yifan didn't delay for too long. He gave a few words of advice and turned to leave, continuing to follow Yi Zhao and Elder Jinming. They walked forward for a while more before finally arriving in front of the wall. Yi Zhao stopped in his tracks and stared fixedly ahead with a deep gaze. Elder Yu frowned. The situation was worse than he had expected. When Nan Yifan caught up, he immediately noticed the low pressure around the two. His heart sank as well. After waiting for a while, seeing that Yi Zhao and Elder Jinming still had no intention of speaking or taking action, Nan Yifan finally spoke hesitantly. Patriarch Yi Zhao, are you sure that the person you're looking for is inside? Elder Yu put his hands behind his back and said indifferently, Patriarch Nan, your daughter and the others should be inside too. Nan Yifan was shocked. How did you? This wall can isolate all auras. Anyone who enters will lose contact with the outside world. A look of horror flashed across Nan Yifan's eyes. He really didn't know about this. He looked at the black wall in front of him again. It was tall, heavy, and majestic. After weathering the wind and frost, the wall was mottled, and the biting, cold, murderous aura kept gushing out from it, almost unbearable. They were still outside, but it was already so unbearable. If they really entered, wouldn't it be even more dangerous? Then we have to get them out quickly, Nan Yifan said nervously. Elder Yu suddenly laughed, but there wasn't any smile on his face. He turned his head and glanced at Nan Yifan. Patriarch Nan, do you know how many people have been trapped here for tens of thousands of years? Nan Yifan looked at him, and a strong sense of uneasiness suddenly surged in his heart. Elder Yu said indifferently, not a single one. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1706. Not a single one. Nan Yifan's eyes widened. Didn't that mean that everyone who entered this place would die with no chance of survival? Then Yu Xing, Yi, and the others, Elder Yu, is what you said true? Nan Yifan had been through a lot in his life and was usually unperturbed even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. However, when he heard this, he panicked. It was very likely that his only two closest bloodlines were inside. If they really could never come out, then, Nan Yifan did not dare to continue thinking. He took a step forward and asked anxiously. Clan leader Yi Zhao, you must have a way, right? If the people Yi Zhao was looking for were inside, he would definitely think of a way to bring them out. Perhaps he could also bring Yu Xing, Yi, and the others. Step back, Yi Zhao suddenly said. Nan Yifan hurriedly did as he was told and looked at Yi Zhao expectantly. Elder Yu wanted to say something but hesitated. In the end, he did not say anything and took a few steps back. Yi Zhao raised his head and looked in front of him. A cluster of crimson gold flames suddenly appeared in his palm. A terrifying aura instantly descended upon the place. The temperature of the surrounding space also rose rapidly with the appearance of this flame. Nan Yifan's atoms apple-bobbed and his throat went dry. However, he did not dare to blink for fear that he would miss something. At the same time, he was also secretly shocked. Yi Zhao's attack was indeed extraordinary. His true realm and strength were obviously more shocking than the rumors. This also made Nan Yifan feel slightly more at ease. Yi Zhao was so powerful. Perhaps he could create a miracle buzz. The moment Yi Zhao attacked, the black wall in front of him immediately reacted. With this buzzing sound, a huge strange totem gradually gathered on the wall and appeared in front of Yi Zhao and the others. Whose totem is this? Why haven't I seen it before? An elder behind Nan Yifan could not help but murmur curiously. A totem that could appear here was obviously not ordinary. However, they all recognized the totem of the famous clans and sects in the world of divine ruins. None of them matched this one. Another elder pondered for a moment and guessed uncertainly. Perhaps it's the totem of some clan or sect that participated in that shocking battle tens of thousands of years ago. This was the most likely guess. Since that battle, countless experts had fallen, and even their families and sects had vanished without a trace in the long river of time. At that time, there weren't many forces that managed to survive. Things like totems were naturally even more obscure. Nan Yifan did not particularly care about this totem. All his attention was now he really was putting all his hope in Yi. As long as Yu Xing and Yi could come out safely, everything else. A faint sound came from the wall. Nan Yifan and the others perked up. Is it going to open? But their expectant faces looked you. The huge totem on the black wall suddenly started to rotate slowly. That was where the sound came from. Almost at the same time, the flame in Yizhao's palms suddenly extinguished. Then, a gust of wind swept out. Yizhao was shocked, and his aura rose rapidly. In an instant, a gust of wind swept out. Dust flew everywhere. A tyrannical and terrifying force swept over. Yizhao was Yizhao after all. In the end, he still managed to stabilize his body in this terrifying storm. However, the ground beneath his feet had already cracked open several times. His feet had sunk half an inch into the ground. Elder Yu, who was at the back, suffered less of the impact, but he also managed to stand still in his position with difficulty. Nan Yifan and the rest were not in such a good situation. Their strength was inferior to Elder Yu's to begin with. Furthermore, they were not completely prepared when the accident occurred. Thus, their figures were sent flying just like that. However, they were all human powerhouses with rich combat experience after all. After suffering the initial loss, they reacted in time and tried their best to stabilize their bodies. But at this time, they had already retreated a distance away from the black wall. But this was not the most worrisome thing, because Yizhao's situation did not look good. Although he was still standing on the spot and refused to retreat, as the totem on the black wall slowly rotated, the power erupting from it became more and more terrifying. The cracks in the ground under Yizhao's feet began to spread further away. Half of Nan Yifan's heart turned cold. Yizhao was the patriarch of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. If even he couldn't do it, then wouldn't the people trapped inside really be hopeless? Nan Yi walked in the dark and winding space. 5 steps in front of her, a translucent figure was walking forward unhurriedly. The surroundings were deathly silent, and she could only hear her own footsteps. The man in front didn't speak, and she didn't dare to ask anything. She could only follow behind carefully. Fortunately, this man seemed to really know the way out. Along the way, their progress was very smooth. Not only did they not encounter any more danger, but the faintly discernible light in front of them seemed to be getting clearer and clearer. This gave Nanny hope. Perhaps, following this man would really be able to get out of here. Although she was also very worried about Big Brother and the rest, she could only care about herself now. After thinking about it, she finally decided to think of a way after getting out of here. Uncle Luo Yen was nowhere to be seen here, and his contact with her father had been cut off. She couldn't even ask for help. Nan Yi was thinking about it when she suddenly realized that the man in front of her had stopped. She thought that he wanted to confirm the direction, so she obediently stopped in her tracks and waited obediently. However, after a while, the person in front still didn't move. Nan Yi opened her mouth, wanting to ask about it. However, the sound of footsteps suddenly fell into her ears. There was someone. Nan Yi's heart skipped a beat, and she hurriedly looked over. On the side, a figure was slowly walking out from the darkness. Although the surroundings were dark, when that person walked closer, she could still vaguely see his appearance. As that person continued to approach, she could clearly feel that the surrounding atmosphere was rapidly becoming stiff and cold. The air seemed to be freezing inch by inch. A heavy and oppressive aura quickly spread. When she saw that person's face clearly, Nan Yi covered her mouth with one hand. At the same time, her eyes widened in shock. How could it be? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 1707. What a coincidence. That person stood rooted to the ground and said indifferently, "I didn't expect to meet you here." Nan Yi's heart seemed to be gripped tightly by something. She was about to speak when she suddenly heard the man in front of her laugh and say, "It's a coincidence. You actually came here one day." Nan Yi was stunned. Only then did she realize that the other party's words were not meant for her. She furrowed her brows and glanced at the two of them with confusion and suspicion. They knew each other? That shouldn't be the case. She recognized the man in front of her. He was with Shang Guanyu back then. He seemed to be some relative of Shang Guanyu. Nan Yi wasn't shocked that he would appear here. At that time, Everyone had been swallowed and entered this place. It was at most an accident and coincidence that they had met. But how did he know this man who was with her? The latter had been locked up here for 1,000 years. The man in front of her continued. Actually, what surprised me even more is that you're still alive. His voice sounded very calm at first, but if one thought about it carefully, they would realize that he seemed to be suppressing something. Nan Yi couldn't describe this feeling. Shengguan Jing smiled as well. I should be the one saying this to you. You're the one who's truly tough. You've been trapped here for so long, but you're still struggling at death's door. As soon as he finished speaking, Nan Yi suddenly felt a strong murderous intent. But this murderous intent only flashed past. By the time Nan Yi came to her senses, the cold and sinister feeling had already disappeared. It was as if everything was just her imagination. Shengguan Jing's gaze swept past Nan Yi. His eyes seemed to have seen through everything. Looks like you helped him. Nan Yi, I'm afraid you still don't know what kind of person you helped, right? Nan Yi inexplicably felt guilty and nervous. She subconsciously glanced at the man in front of her. Why did his words sound so strange? Could it be that this man's identity was extraordinary, or was there something fishy? Shengguan Jing, the feud between us has already been settled back then. Let's mind our own business now. You can do whatever you want, but don't stop me from leaving. Otherwise, I won't be polite. This was the first time Nan Yi had heard such threatening words from the man in front of her. Shengguan Jing laughed out loud as if he had heard a joke. After a long while, he said, You Hongshan, what else can you do to me? Based on the fact that you don't even have a physical body and are just a remnant soul. How laughable. Back then, Yu Hongshan's strength had already been inferior to his, and he had only managed to fight him to a draw by relying on various schemes and tricks. After that fierce battle, Shengguan Jing was wounded and went to the north of the untainted wilderness. Yu Hongshan, on the other hand, was swallowed into the space of the Black Wall and could not come out for 1,000 years. In fact, neither of them had expected the other to be able to survive until now. Even more so, they didn't expect to meet each other here. Yu Hongshan's aura surged. Clearly he was enraged. His voice was cold. Shengguan Jing, do you think I'm still the old me? As soon as he finished speaking, a majestic aura burst out from his body. Shengguan Jing narrowed his eyes and smiled. I was wondering why you were so arrogant. It turns out that you've broken through to become a god. This was indeed rare. It was almost impossible to break through from a high god to a god without a physical body. No wonder he was so arrogant. It was obvious that Yu Hongshan had put in a lot of effort in this aspect over the past 1,000 years. Or perhaps, he had encountered some fortuitous opportunity here. However, Shengguan Jing didn't care. His feet slightly staggered, and the aura on his body rapidly became dangerous. In that case, I'll have a good fight with you. Seeing that Shengguan Jing was really going to fight here, Yu Hongshan's face twisted for a moment. He had only said those words to intimidate Shengguan Jing. He didn't really want to fight him. He wasn't afraid of Shengguan Jing. What he wanted to do the most right now was to get out of here. It wouldn't be too late to fight after he got out. However, Shengguan Jing didn't seem to have that intention. Yu Hongshan suppressed his anger and said coldly, Shengguan Jing, you've been here for a while. Shengguan Jing, you've been here for a while. You should be aware of the danger here. If you really want to fight, sure. We'll talk after we get out. If you want to die here, don't drag others down with you. Shengguan Jing narrowed his eyes. Although he didn't really believe Yu Hongshan's words, he did realize that there was something strange about this place along the way. And the others must have been forcefully devoured and brought here. Unfortunately, he couldn't find them even after searching for a long time. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly as he looked Yu Hongshan up and down. Do you know how to get out? Yu Hongshan didn't say anything. He had been trapped here for 1,000 years. Although he hadn't been able to leave that place, he still had a good understanding of this place. Of course, he knew how to get out. Otherwise, he wouldn't have tried so hard to get Nan Yi to help him. He was silent for a long time before saying, As long as you promise that you won't fight before we get out, I can take you out of here. Nan Yi was shocked. Senior, how can I do that? This Shangguan Jing was in cahoots with Shangguan Yu and the others. She couldn't wait for him to stay here forever and die here. How could she take him out? Yu Hongshan turned his head halfway and looked at her with an extremely cold gaze. Shut up if you don't want to die. Nan Yi was stunned by the reprimand. However, due to the other party's pressure, she didn't dare to make a fuss. She could only grit her teeth and swallow the rest of her words. She still had to get out. After leaving this place, she wouldn't have to be threatened by these people anymore. Yu Hongshan looked at Shangguan Jing again, waiting for his answer. Shangguan Jing crossed his arms and frowned, as if he was deep in thought. But Yu Hongshan wasn't in a hurry at all. As long as there was nothing wrong with Shangguan Jing's brain, he would definitely agree to his suggestion. After a moment, Shangguan Jing finally spoke. Since you know how to get out, Yu Hongshan waited calmly. Then, you definitely know how to find the others? Yu Hongshan's expression froze when he heard this. He said gloomily, Shangguan Jing, what do you mean? Shangguan Jing laughed. Nothing much. I just hope that you can help me find you and the others. Then we can go out together. After all, you and I are acquaintances. You won't be unwilling to help me with such a small favor, right? Shangguan Jing. Yu Hongshan suddenly raised his voice. Shangguan Jing's smile didn't change as he raised his hand. Please. Chu Luiwei was still focused on the zither score in her hand. She didn't remember how much she had read, but the number of zither scores hanging around her had obviously decreased by a lot. And during this process, she read faster and faster. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from Love Network. Chapter 1708. Chu Luiwei had listened to that tune many times. She was extremely intelligent. She could remember almost everything that she had seen or heard. But because this was not an ordinary score, she still could not memorize it completely even though she had listened to it many times. Every syllable seemed to be wonderful and bouncing in her ears. The sound of the zither brushed past her ears and passed through her mind, but it only left behind a very faint trace. So, Chu Luiwei could only memorize it bit by bit, and then compare it with the score in her hands to distinguish the real from the fake. She did not know if it was because she had gotten used to it, but she gradually became numb to the pain all over her body. This allowed her to divert more energy to focus on the score. Jing's hands paused, and he tilted his head slightly. As far as his eyes could see, it was a thick black. So noisy, he muttered in a low voice, and there was a trace of impatience in his tone. He had never been a patient person, but most of the time he was too lazy to care, so he turned a blind eye and let it pass. But now was not the time. He had waited for so long, and finally Chu Luiwei came. It was not easy to get his cultivation on the right track. How could he be disturbed? His well-defined fingers moved gently, and a light blade flew out in an instant. And he did all this silently. Chu Luiwei, who was focused on the score, did not notice. Boom! With a violent sound, a ball of fire suddenly exploded in front of Yizhao. He tipped his toes and quickly retreated. Violent energy swept out in all directions, and there were even scorch marks on the ground. Nan Yifan and the others retreated again. After a while, the force finally subsided. Smoke and dust filled the air, and there was still the smell of something burning in the air. Hot and anxious. Nan Yifan let go of his hand, and his palm was already wet with sweat. Just now, it was too scary. Yi Zhao and the force of the black wall were fighting head-on, and the two sides were fighting fiercely. Just by standing there, they could feel the terrible heat that would rush toward them in the next second. If it were them, they would not even be able to hold on for a third of the time. Patriarch, how are you? Elder Yu quickly rushed to Yi Zhao's side, a rare look of nervousness on his face. Yi Zhao shook his head. I'm fine, but this wall has been completely sealed off by an extremely ferocious force. I'm afraid it will be difficult to force our way in from the outside. Elder Yu had actually already expected this outcome. However, when he saw Yi Zhao's grave expression, his heart unconsciously sank. If even the patriarch had said so, if that was the case, then there was really no way out of this matter. But Dumpling and the others were still inside. They couldn't just let it go like this, could they? Yi Zhao was silent for a moment. He raised his eyes to look at the black wall, and there seemed to be waves surging in his eyes. After a long while, he said, "Let's wait and see." Elder Yu's lips moved. Nan Yifan and the others also heard this and couldn't help looking at each other. If even Yi Zhao and the others couldn't do anything, then wouldn't it be even more hopeless for them? Nan Yifan clenched his fists tightly, and his brows furrowed. He was really worried and nervous. After all, Nan Yuxing and Nanny were both inside. If something really happened, Patriarch, why don't we wait for a while? An elder beside him advised in a low voice. In the current situation, it was definitely impossible to force it. Since Yi Zhao and the others had decided to wait, then they didn't seem to have a better idea. Nan Yifan took out a jade pendant. For light spots were still floating gently in it. However, one of them had obviously become much dimmer. That was Elder Bai Tong. Nan Yifan kept the jade pendant and stared at the black wall in front of him. Wait. He waved at the two of them. You guys should also rest for a while and adjust. After rushing all the way here, all of them were exhausted. And they hadn't encountered any trouble. If they encountered any danger again, it would be difficult for them to save their own lives. The two elders nodded in agreement. Nan Yifan closed his eyes and muttered in a low voice. The murderous aura in the god-slaying tomb seems to be getting stronger. He had never encountered such a situation when he came here before. He didn't know what was going on. Just as he turned around and was about to adjust his breathing, a strange fluctuation suddenly came from the black wall. Buzz. Everyone present quickly looked up. They saw the light on the wall rotating. The huge totem was even more dazzling. Then, a figure suddenly fell out of it. Nan Yifan looked over and was pleasantly surprised. Who else could it be but his precious daughter, Nan? Nanny was still in a daze, but when she heard this voice, she was shocked and subconsciously looked over. Father! Nan Yi widened her eyes in disbelief. Nan Yifan, however, had already rushed over. How are you? He asked as he pulled Ni. Father! This? Nanny cried out in pain. Nan Yifan hurriedly let go of her, only to see that there was a long scratch on her arm. Her flesh and blood had already stained half of her sleeve red. His heart suddenly tightened and he hurriedly sized up Nanyi's entire body. Only then did he realize that there were countless similar wounds on her body. It was not an exaggeration to say that she was covered in wounds. What made Nan Yifan even more frightened was that Nanyi's breathing was very weak and her face was extremely pale. She was obviously seriously injured. Nan Yifan's heart ached and he didn't know where to start. Why are you like this? What exactly did she encounter? At this time, the two elders behind him had also rushed over. They were calmer than Nan Yifan. Master, let's treat second miss first. One of the elders reminded him. Nan Yifan came to his senses and hurriedly took out a green jade bottle. He poured out a pill and carefully fed it to Nan. This is a golden origin pill. Take it quickly. From the sound of the jade bottle, there should be a few more pills in it. The golden origin pill was a top-notch pill that only a supremacy doctor could refine. It had a miraculous effect on stopping bleeding, treating injuries, and recovering the body. Even for many first-rate aristocratic families, this thing was very precious, but in Nan Yifan's place, it was easily a bottle. It was obvious that he was rich. Nan Yi swallowed the golden origin pill and felt a warm energy surge through her body. Her pale face also had a hint of rosy color. Only then did Nan Yifan carefully help her up. What exactly is going on? Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.